This is Business Weekend with Ross Greenwood.
Hi and welcome to Business Weekend. I'm Ross Greenwood. It's great to have your company. Coming up on the program today, the full first broadcast interview with former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, along with her new boss, Optus Chief Executive Kelly Bayer Rosmarin, on their fight with Telstra and her future in politics. And you sure you can't be tempted back into politics at some stage?
1,000,000%.
And look, it's been a big week of results from Australia's largest companies, including the Commonwealth Bank, Telstra, Suncorp and REA Group. But we're going to concentrate on two topical companies, Coronado Coal and the insurance giant IAG.
We're selling some coal now into the thermal markets into Europe simply because the pricing is better.
Plus, the big energy companies hit back following an interview on last week's program by Squadron Energy's chief executive that they were deliberately not taking gas that could alleviate the East Coast shortages. So all of that and more coming up on today's program. Look, let's start the program with our exclusive interview this week with the former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. She resigned as Premier following the revelation that she had given evidence to the Independent Commission Against Corruption into the behaviour of her former colleague and partner Darryl Maguire. The final report of that investigation is yet to be handed down. Berejiklian joined the telecommunications company Optus as its Managing Director of Enterprise, Business and Institutional. And this week I sat down with the former New South Wales Premier and her boss, the Chief Executive of Optus, Kelly Bayer Rosmarin, for an exclusive first broadcast interview. Kelly Bayer Rosmarin, Gladys Berejiklian, many thanks for your time. Kelly, can I start with you? Why was it that you hired Gladys Berejiklian so quickly after she'd come out of politics, and given the fact also that there was still an ICAC report to be handed down into her behaviour? Were you concerned at all about any behavioural consequences or reputational risk to Optus as a result of that?
So for us, it was a really wonderful opportunity to hire somebody who has a lot of integrity, great work ethic, who gained the respect of everybody in New South Wales and managed through the pandemic in an exemplary way, and has a long track record of delivering great results for stakeholders. We've brought in Gladys to look after our business and enterprise teams. It's a part of the market where, despite many years of trying, the incumbent still holds a very significant market share. And so we need to shake it up and think differently, bring in someone smart with a fresh perspective who's willing to think differently, work hard, and build a great team around her that's going to transform that part of the business for us. So we were really delighted to welcome Gladys on board. We, of course, considered all the issues and decided the public is smart enough to be able to know what Gladys does at Optus and separate that from her time before in politics.
I was going to ask you about that, Gladys. I mean, coming into a job such as this, it's still a profile. You've had a very low profile since you took this job. Were you at all concerned about going into a business, again, with that ICAC report still to be delivered at some point in the future?
Look, I relished the opportunity to roll up my sleeves and work hard for an organisation I believe in. For an organisation who have amazing people, an amazing leader, and an organisation that touches millions of Australians, and I found that extremely appealing. And I think people appreciate that once you leave public life, my decision was to go back to the private sector and to work hard, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing, and looking forward to really contributing to economic growth and supporting businesses on their journey, especially as the headwinds approach.
Yeah, okay, so can I ask you about when the two of you were negotiating, what sort of commitment, when you looked at each other in the eye and shook hands on the deal, what sort of a commitment for tenure did you give to Kelly?
Well, I gave her a commitment to work my hardest and do my best. And I was also very fussy about who I worked for. I think Kelly is one of the best business leaders we have in Australia. She's incredibly intelligent, knows how to bring people together with purpose and inspire, in our case, about 6,000 people.
But you'd understand what I mean about that is tenure is important, because there is a lot of speculation about you returning to politics at some stage down the track.
I've already said I have no interest in that whatsoever.
And look, it's not usual that when you take on a business leader and are building the dream team that you ask each person to give you a particular commitment of length of time. So I wouldn't have imposed anything like that on Gladys when I don't impose that on other leaders that I bring in. My job is to build the strongest possible team for Optus and for our customers, and to inspire them to want to be here every day, giving 100% and living to their best potential by being here. So it's up to me to create the environment that retains the best people and makes this the right place for the best people to do their best work every day.
Do you think Gladys would make a good member of our federal parliament in the future? Do you think that ultimately she might make a good Prime Minister of this country?
What I might want for Gladys may not be the same as what she wants for herself.
Yeah. Do you think you've ultimately been burnt from politics and that really this life is now an easier life for you from a personal profile? I mean, as I say, you've been very quiet. You've deliberately kept away from media since that time, as compared with the past when you were front page of the papers most days.
Look, I exceeded my expectations as to what I would achieve in public life, and that's behind me. And I'm proud of what I've done, but I'm now looking forward to the future. And I feel so grateful that Optus has welcomed me the way they have, and the contribution we're making again to economic growth, supporting businesses, especially in the segment that I've got the privilege of looking after, small, medium and large businesses who are the backbone of our economy. And looking forward to continuing to get my teeth stuck into this really important job.
Okay, so Kelly, can I go to something that Gladys has had input to, and that was the fight that you have got right now to try and prevent Telstra from basically merging its services with TPGs in regional areas of Australia. In many ways, that I would have thought prevents the doubling or tripling up of infrastructure being built in those areas. Why is that such an important fight for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is really important for Australia because, as we know, the communication services that we provide are highly valued by all Australians, and people have come to rely on them every day to be able to complete their work, talk to their loved ones, be entertained. Every facet of our lives actually relies on having good, reliable connectivity. What regional Australia needs is more connectivity, not less. And unfortunately, this proposal is about reducing the amount of infrastructure that there is in regional Australia. It's about the number 1 player and the number 3 player banding together and ganging up on the number 2 player. And we don't think that that's healthy for competition, for innovation, and it will overturn 30 years of policy that's been designed to promote competition and access, particularly in regional areas. And it will result in higher prices and worse outcomes for Australians in the bush.
Just one question about that. Was TPG ever really going to roll out much infrastructure in the future? Wasn't it really always going to be you and Telstra that was going to roll out the infrastructure?
Yeah, so there's a lot of elements to answering that question. So firstly, TPG does have some infrastructure in regional areas, and part of the proposed arrangement is for TPG to give that infrastructure to Telstra and actually to decommission a bunch of it. So that does mean there's a diminishing of infrastructure in regional Australia. Over and above that, TPG is also proposing to give all of its spectrum assets in the regions to Telstra, which circumvents all of the caps on spectrum ownership, and it means that Telstra will have a service that's really unassailable in the regions. Once that occurs, it becomes almost impossible to make a business case for any further investment in regional Australia.
So is that the risk that ultimately your shareholders, Singapore Telecom in particular, would actually prevent more infrastructure being built in those regional areas because there is no business case to do so?
Correct. Well, if you can't make a business case to somehow gain market share from investing in more infrastructure, then you can't justify doing that investment in more regional infrastructure. And as a result, you're going to have a regional monopoly in the end. And we don't think that benefits anybody.
Okay, Gladys, the one role that you've been brought in here to do is to look after business and enterprise. But it strikes me that during the pandemic, of course, businesses now learnt to have their staff working from home, working remotely. This is a key part of the way in which the workforce has changed during the pandemic. Does it sort of ever enter your mind that as Premier and Transport Minister for New South Wales, you built infrastructure to get people into the metropolitan hubs? Now you're with Optus, you're sort of encouraging and helping them to stay at home.
Well, I think the important thing to note is a lot of people chose to work from the regions, and that's why the Telstra TPG proposal is of such a concern, because it doesn't matter now where you work from, where you conduct your business. You actually need that vital connectivity, and you need to have choice as to who you choose to be your provider or your carrier. So that's why I think what you've just put to me is a good case for why the Telstra TPG proposal should be knocked on its head, because we want to encourage growth in our regional communities. We want to encourage people to do business, whether in a traditional workplace or from home. And in our case, I'm proud of the fact that we have a policy where we encourage staff to come in 3 days a week and then work 2 days flexibly. Other companies have different arrangements, but no matter who you are, you should have the choice as to where you work from, if that's what your policy is, your company policy is, and we should be able to provide that as a competitor, as a challenger in a very important part of the market.
But you get my point, is that really the recycling of assets that the New South Wales government did went largely into building brand new transport infrastructure. That it really is the shining light of metropolitan cities in Australia. So the question is whether really in hindsight, without knowing the pandemic was coming along, whether that has been overdone, given the fact that people can now use Optus services, Telstra services, the NBN, and work from home?
Well, I think the important thing is to provide options for people in a growing population. Our population won't be static. People will choose where they live, and we need to give them those options. And why should someone, because of social disadvantage or another reason, be excluded from where they choose to work or live or play because of access? And that's why, whether it's in that hard infrastructure you speak about or telecommunications, it's vital to give those people good, accessible, affordable options. And that's why I feel so passionately about Optus continuing, along with a whole lot of other players in the market, having that competitive opportunity to do so, especially given there's far more decentralisation in how people are working. They're far more mobile. They're working from multiple sites. Companies and businesses are really very innovative in the way that they're supporting their employees, and we want to be part of that indefinitely into the future in all parts of Australia.
Okay, yeah, because Kelly, this is a really important aspect of this. The democratisation of information means a person's location does not discriminate against them in terms of gaining information or being able to gain access to a market in another part of the world. That's really what high-speed broadband has brought to regional Australia. And again, that's what companies such as Optus have brought to them as well. So are you conscious of this and making certain that that is affordable for those communities and for those people to be able to do that?
Absolutely. And you know, as Gladys has mentioned, we are passionate and cognizant of our role in underpinning the whole digital revolution. There is no future digital economy without the connectivity that underpins all of that. And we know that we've provided great options so far, but that it's not enough, particularly in regional areas. And that's why there's an enormous investment going into 5G, which unlocks economic growth for the country. And competitive 5G will do so even more, because not all 5G is equal. You can roll out 5G in a way that looks very similar and performs in a very similar way to 4G. Or you can roll out 5G that's super fast, low latency, a lot more throughput. And what we want to see is more investment in the right kind of future-oriented communications technology in Australia, so that it unlocks our ability to be a true digital economy and compete on a global scale. And it does that across Australia, no matter where you live, and doesn't create a divide between the city and the country.
So on that basis, though, with 5G and eventually 6G when that rolls out, do you make your money from selling the network, or do you make your money from the enterprises that are hung off it? Telstra, as you know, has got an enterprise division. You've got one as well, where you're looking to make strategic investments. So where is the real money in this into the future for businesses such as yours?
Well, for us at Optus at the moment, the majority of the money that we make comes from our consumer business. And that is because we have not been able to penetrate deeply enough into the business and enterprise sectors.
Which is what Gladys is here to do.
Exactly, where Telstra has about 70% market share after 30 years of competing with them. So that's exactly what Gladys is here to do. To unlock that, it's a huge growth opportunity for us. We know we have excellent technology. We know we have the fastest 5G in Australia. We know we have amazing people who are delivering a great service. We know we're more innovative than any telecommunications company in Australia and most around the world. And we want to bring those benefits to businesses and enterprises and government clients. And Gladys and I are going to work very hard to make sure we've got a strategy that brings that to fruition.
Okay, so you've now got to deal with the businesses. You used to deal with them when you were the Premier, when you were the Transport Minister, during your ministerial life. So the question is whether A, you've got a receptive audience, and B, whether there is, again, enterprise that comes from this, joint ventures, collaborations, or whether you see this as being simply a selling of the network services?
Well, I think what's really important for us is to put the business, the client at the heart of everything we do. And as you know, Ross, the B2B market is very different and diverse. And we have to make sure we cater for the right business and really make them feel that we're catering for their needs moving forward, whether it's a small business that's just starting off or a larger enterprise. We also have to be a step ahead. Sometimes businesses and larger companies aren't aware of what's available to them, especially as people are now looking at their discretionary spend. They'll want to see, well, how can we do things more simply? How can we digitise? How can we be more connected? And there are opportunities for us to really support them in that way. So I'm really looking forward to that. There's no doubt it's a very challenging part of the market for us, but also one in which I think we can really listen and learn from the market itself and respond accordingly depending on the external environment as well.
But as Chief Executive, you be conscious, Kelly, of the fact that there are businesses who are customers of yours that make hundreds of millions or billions of dollars by using your network. The question is why you as the telco don't share in that money. That's my point. So where is the payback? If you're simply selling a service, of course, it's always going to be a race to the bottom in terms of competition.
I mean, look, Ross, it's a great question. I often sit there and think, if you removed yourself from the realities of our industry, you would sit there and say, telecommunications services, everybody needs it every day, uses it every day, they're using more and more of it every day, they can't live without it. Telco should be in its heyday. We should be raking in the profits. And that is not true of the sector globally. The sector globally has falling ROICs and real challenges.
What's your return on assets at the moment?
It's lower than we would like it to be. And that's, again, true for the whole industry globally. And a lot of that is because we are investing most of that in continuously upgrading the infrastructure and making it better. And you're right, there are a lot of companies who profit over the top of that without sharing those profits or reinvesting them back in the infrastructure that they're using to generate those profits.
Including some of the biggest global companies.
Yeah, including big global companies.
Google's, Meta, go for your life.
Yeah,
any of them.
Netflix, the big gaming companies.
That's right.
In fact, some of them even will charge you more for high definition streaming, even though they don't pay for any of the streaming infrastructure. All we do.
So in other words, is the whole structure of the telecommunications
correct.
industry
So there
right?
are structural challenges with the telecommunications industry that do need to be addressed over time if we're going to sustainably be able to continue to invest in the level of infrastructure to meet the growing demand for our services and the voracious appetite for more and more data streamed more and more quickly.
Okay, because
so I have no doubt that will evolve and the conversation will mature.
Who should pay for the infrastructure? At the moment, it's your company that pays for it, or you seek some assistance from somewhere else. But who should pay for this long term? That's the big question.
And that's what the industry should be working together to determine with all the stakeholders, the OTTs, the streamers, the gamers, the telco companies, the equipment suppliers and the government. We should all be working together to determine the right level of continued investment that we want and a sustainable way to move forward so that all parties can benefit.
Okay, then does that mean the NBN comes into this as well, quite clearly? NBN Co this week puts out significantly improving profits, debts being reduced dramatically, and also that the government has rejected the approval of the ACCC for new wholesale pricing, which you are a beneficiary of. So some people would suggest that that means that any potential privatisation of NBN Co is now onto the back burner with this government, at least anyway. Yeah,
well, the privatisation of NBN has never been approved by any government. So as far as we're concerned, it hasn't been on the card.
Yeah, I know, but it's been set up for it, surely.
It's certainly been speculated about.
You keep on pushing up wholesale prices to the highest in the world, something's going on.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, what you can see is there's been a clear transfer of value between the telco operators to NBN. And you can look at their level of profitability relative to the rest of us. I think for me, the most important thing that we can work with NBN to achieve is better service levels for customers. I believe one of the reasons that everybody struggles to make money reselling NBN is because we don't have the right level of customer focus and customer obsession coming from the NBN. So that means customer appointments aren't always met, and the responsibility of taking those calls from customers, rescheduling things, falls on us. There's faults with NBN or outages. Who gets the phone call? We do as the RSPs. So there's a lot of cost and time and effort layered into the whole system as a result of NBN not being so focused on customer outcomes
You're saying
and
it doesn't do
improving
its job, is
customer
that what you're telling
performance.
me? You're telling me they don't do their job?
I'm saying their job should be redefined to be all about customer service. And if we could achieve that, there would be more profit to go around in this part of the market.
Okay, so Gladys Berejiklian, you as Premier and previously were the champion of privatisation. Sell assets, recycle those assets, go and create new infrastructure, get a charge on that, maybe sell it off, recycle it again. So here is a classic case where a government could recycle an asset, get the money, use it for something else that's more productive for the community. Should the NBN be privatised?
Well, fortunately, I don't have to make that decision, but I will say this. What pretty much shocked me when I entered the industry was that the NBN doesn't actually even have, to Kelly's point, a service level agreement. They're actually not accountable or have timeframes by which they have to provide customers with a particular service time. So that for me was quite shocking, that if you're providing an essential service and so many people are relying on that service and corporations are relying on their business models depending on what you provide, and not to have a service level agreement with either your business partners or else the public, to me was quite confronting. So perhaps that could be your question to the CEO of the...
All right, well maybe that's where it goes to. Look, just to finish up, I can't not ask you this question. One of your former colleagues, John Barilaro, has obviously been in front of an inquiry. Now, regardless of everything that's been said and, you know, what might come out of that, one question is about people who have been former politicians going into positions such as that. You have chosen not to do that. Just tell me about your own attitudes about the path that former politicians should take when they're leaving politics.
Well, Ross, you're free to ask me that question. I don't have to answer it anymore.
No, you don't have to answer it anymore.
But I will say this, Ross. I've taken a decision which I'm incredibly proud of and very excited by. I can't speak for what other people decide. I can only speak for myself. And I'm really, really looking forward to the next chapter of my life. And that's with Optus, with our amazing people, and really making a difference to the organisation, which is what I've always been about.
And you sure you can't be tempted back into politics at some stage?
1,000,000%.
1,000,000%.
I understand, Ross. We all miss seeing Gladys on the TV and taking bets on what colour jacket she's going to wear each day. So, but I think she's doing a great public service by being at Optus, being at a challenger brand, and helping us bring the magic of digitalisation to millions of businesses across Australia. So her impact will still be felt.
Kelly Bayer, Rosmarin, Gladys Berejiklian, many thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, Australia's big gas giants hit back at claims they're deliberately not buying gas to squeeze up prices. Plus, the interview, the chief executives of Coronado Coal and Australia's biggest insurance company, IAG. It's great to have your company here on Business Weekend. Last weekend on the program, we interviewed Eva Hanley, who's Chief Executive of the Andrew Forrest-owned Squadron Energy. It's developing a gas import terminal at Port Kembla. And Hanley says these plans can be advanced to ship in gas from mid-next year and therefore take pressure off the predicted East Coast gas shortage. But she claims big energy companies are refusing to deal with Squadron or indeed to take its gas. So let's just recap a little of that conversation. We get the ship that comes down the east coast of Australia from Queensland. You've got the gas, you've turned that into gas. It's now able to go into the East Coast network to take pressure off the prices, to create supply. Who do you sell it to?
Great question, Ross. Ideally, we'd sell it to the three gentailers, so Origin, AGL and Energy Australia.
Yep.
They have large contracted customers, and our understanding at this point is that they don't need any more gas.
Oh, hang on, I thought there was a gas shortage.
Well, you think so. So what we're trying to do is look at other options. So we need to sell the gas to somebody. We've got two options then. We either sell it directly to customers, so commercial, industrial manufacturers, and we're looking at that now. And the other option is that someone intervenes, like AEMO, the market operator, to procure gas on behalf of the whole gas network.
Well, I said at the time it seems gobsmacking that while the ACCC says there will be a gas shortage next year equivalent to 10% of demand, the big energy companies simply won't deal with Squadron Energy. So this week we went to the ACCC and to the energy companies to get a reaction. Now, the competition regulator told us in a statement it's a matter for gas buyers, including gentailers, whether to enter into negotiations or contracts with an LNG import terminal. In other words, they're saying it's a free market. You can buy and sell from whom you choose. Well, unless the energy regulator, AEMO, would step in. So then we went to AEMO. It told us a few things. First, it said it's identified LNG import terminals as flexible sources of gas supply that may be more economic than some pipelines, especially during the 3 months of winter. It says it can't direct energy companies to deal with players such as Squadron, and it says it's only permitted to trade in natural gas to the extent necessary or desirable for the safety and security of the Victorian gas market. But what about those big gas companies that ever-handedly claims are refusing to deal with Squadron? Well, AGL told us Squadron has not offered to sell LNG or domestic gas to AGL. AGL is at a preliminary stage of negotiations with a number of import terminals, including Squadron, around providing a regasification service for LNG, which would be sourced and procured by AGL from 2025 onwards. Energy Australia told us Energy Australia welcomes additional supplies of gas into the energy system. We are in discussions regarding gas supply with Squadron, other import terminal proponents and domestic producers. Our aim is to procure gas at the most competitive prices. And Origin Energy told us we have discussed with Squadron the option of contracting gas from the LNG import facility for several years. And the reason we haven't entered an agreement to date is because there are cheaper sources of domestic gas supplies available. And these provide the best chance of keeping gas prices lower for our customers. So it seems that the bottom line is the energy companies reject the ACCC's forecast of a looming gas shortage, and they see cheaper sources of gas coming through pipelines otherwise earmarked for overseas that are then relayed back into our local markets. There is a view that we picked up this week that the pipeline gas is considered cheaper rather than gas coming via a ship, and that'll have a big impact on the viability of Squadron and other importers trying to change the gas supply demand dynamic on the east coast of Australia. The Australian insurance industry has been wrecked by a series of natural disasters that have made the nation rethink the way it protects the community. The Queensland and New South Wales floods, with more than $5.1 billion worth of claims, are the second most costly in Australian history. A year earlier, separate floods were worth around $1.3 billion. And in 2019-20, the deadly bushfires of that spring and summer cost a further $2.3 billion. Well, this week I sat down with Nick Hawkins, the Chief Executive of IAG, Australia's biggest insurer, after he announced a net profit of $347 million, up from a loss of $427 million the previous year, and just asked how the industry is going to cope in the years ahead.
I mean, that's been a tough run. It's been a very tough run for our customers, what you've just described. That's impacted people's lives, their properties, their livelihoods. But what we have in Australia, we've got a very resilient industry. We've been able to manage our businesses, and others have, the industry, through what you've described has been a pretty tough couple of years, and end up in pretty good shape. What we've talked about today is we've been able to deal with that. Some of our headline results have obviously been impacted by those perils, but we've sort of come out with a strong business, and we're able to grow our organisation. We're seeing our relationships with our customers sort of strong as I remember. Our retention rates are very good. We've got a challenge with one of our commercial businesses here in Australia. That's improving, and New Zealand's also doing very well. So we sort of feel like our company has come through that tough time, and actually we look pretty good.
Okay, so that being the case though, the amount of premiums you've written, the total volume of premiums is up, but you admit that that's largely inflationary. Yeah. So in other words, if there is a claim in a flood affected area, in a bushfire affected area, the cost of rebuilding is going up, and that ultimately comes back to a cost that you bear.
Yeah, and that's a topic that we're very focused on. We know that sort of changing weather, increased frequency and severity of events. We know that some of the challenges in the last couple of years is going to continue. We've had to reflect some of that as well as inflationary in our pricing. But there's a real discussion here around actually mitigation and resilience of our country, because what we just talked about, we don't see that changing over the next 10, 20, 30 years. That's going to be a theme that our country's going to have to deal with. We need to sort of lean into mitigation. We need investment. We need zoning decisions. We need building standards that can adapt to what we're seeing as this changed environment. And we need a more resilient country, and we need to. That's a long-term investment plan.
I was worried about that. I think Australians should be worried about this. If Australians can't bear the price of insurance because there is a lack of mitigation, then ultimately the community is put at risk to increasing numbers of natural disasters that we bear.
Yeah, and we're sort of in that chain. I mean, in a way, our company and our industry, we're the shock absorber, aren't we, for individuals or businesses' sort of challenges and volatility. We take that and we sort of manage that. But in the environment where we're going to, potentially going to see more of this over the next 10, 20, 30 years, I think insurance is not going to be the solver of this. What we need to do is sort of lean into the bigger issue around mitigation, investment, and really make sure we can adapt our country to be more resilient, where these challenges are going to continue.
But how does that fit with the fact that Australia's population is projected to rise from 25 million to 35 million in literally the next 15 years or so?
And I think we need to be thoughtful about where that population lives, recognising the changing environment that we're living in, and how they live, and the type of structures that we're building, the way we're going about that, where development is occurring, being thoughtful about, in this changing world and the changing environment, the changing perils risk around, particularly down the east coast of Australia, making sure that in our decision making that we're thinking about that.
Because there's no doubt that in the past, either state governments or city councils have allowed homes to be built in places where people have been put in harm's way. I think that's what worries the community. And the problem is there's a point at which you say, I'm sorry, we can't insure you. You've had 4 floods in 18 months. Or, I'm sorry, we can't insure you. You are in a very high bushfire prone area. That's the reality of it. And so it's either that government's got to make decisions, councils have got to make decisions, or you make the decision for them by saying, I'm sorry, we can't insure you.
And I think we all come together, because I think there's an opportunity for a more coordinated approach. Obviously, we have a lot of knowledge, a company like IAG, a lot of history, a lot of experience in how, and where risks are and the likelihood of them occurring again. And I think that more of that needs to be incorporated into that ecosystem of what the industry knows, council planning, states, federal governments. This problem's not going to go away. So the more we can be coordinated as an industry and a local and state and federal governments, the more likely we're going to be able to create a more resilient Australia.
Because there's another fundamental risk here. If you have to put more money aside to cope with increasing perils in the future, and people then say, I'm sorry, we can't afford the price of that insurance because the price is going up too much, or indeed that there's a competitive insurance market, you become less profitable or another insurer becomes less profitable. It really doesn't help the community in many ways that you've got this ongoing pressure that's just building.
That's right. I mean, we need, our economy needs a strong insurance sector, and therefore we need to be able to balance, how that all fits together in the way you described.
So then, again, go back to this issue of population. Where do the people, the extra 10 million people that are coming into Australia over the next couple of decades, where do they go to? Because as I say, they can't, go below into the flood zones where a lot of building has taken place in southeast Queensland and in New South Wales over the past decade or so. Where are they going to go?
I mean, we've got a big country, so that's helpful. And I think we just need to be thoughtful and coordinated in how we go about this, right? Because there is knowledge within the communities, within the industry, within lots of parts of our country. We need to be just thinking the whole time, we want a resilient country in 50 years' time. We don't want to create. We've already got challenges in the way we've built our country to date. Let's not make that worse for the next generation. Let's be thoughtful about, as we continue to invest and grow and population increases in our country, let's make sure that the way we do that is in a way that is resilient.
Nick Hawkins, Chief Executive of IAG, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross.
Well, Coronado Global Resources is a coal producer. Its coal is used mainly in the steel-making process, but many would like businesses like this one to be closed down. The only thing is, in a global energy crunch, Coronado's full-year profit was up more than 600%. Coal prices soared during the financial year above $500 US a tonne, which made Coronado one of the very best performing stocks on our share market. It's up 60% in the past year. The Brisbane-based company has mines in Queensland's Bowen Basin and the Central Appalachian region of the United States. Chief Executive Jerry Spindler caught up with Edward Boyd a little earlier this week.
We saw coal prices on a PLV benchmark basis go past $600 a tonne momentarily. Our average price was well over $300 for the year, or $300 for the first half, I believe, and clearly it was a significant contributor to the quarter, or to the half year.
And where are your biggest customers around the world?
India is our biggest customer for the Australian operations. China and domestically are the biggest customers for the US operations.
And how has demand from the European market changed since the war in Ukraine started in February?
Well, the demand from Europe has dropped significantly. There is anticipation of a recession, and the demand for metallurgical coal inputs into Europe has dropped, but the demand for thermal coal inputs has jumped because of course, the curtailment of gas from Russia into Europe. So they're looking to stockpile as much coal as they can.
And what's that doing for Coronado?
We're selling some coal now into the thermal markets into Europe simply because the pricing is better, and we get to sell a coal with a higher recovery into Europe as a thermal coal. So we're taking advantage of that.
You had a record half year, but there was some wet weather problems as well, particularly your mine in Queensland. When it starts raining heavily, can you just explain to our viewers what happens at a coal mine?
Well, there are two things principally. First is infrastructure gets impacted. So roads to the mine can flood. It's rare that the mine floods. We haven't had, dragline booms sticking out of pits the way they did about 10 years ago. But some pits can get flooded a bit, and the soil can get a good bit more saturated than it normally does. That plus the haul roads can get wet, get a little more slick. So commonly, for safety reasons, we don't run trucks on slick haul roads.
And did you need to evacuate your mine in Queensland at one point over the last 6 months?
We did for a 2-day period simply because of the infrastructure. The roads got flooded and people could not get in or out. So for their safety and convenience, we did evacuate the mine.
Just looking at your balance sheet, you don't appear to have any debt and are sitting on a lot of cash at the moment. So what are you going to do with all that money?
We've got some debt. Right now, we're still net cash. We have a dividend policy that says we'll between 60 and 100% of free cash flow, and we've done that year to date. Beyond this, we'll continue to make distributions if there's excess cash and look for opportunities to grow either intrinsically or if there's an opportunistic acquisition, we'll look at that as well.
Yeah, a lot of major banks are turning away from coal companies and refusing to fund them for ESG purposes. So in the future, where will you be able to raise capital from?
Well, there are some banks that are still loaning or providing loans to coal companies, particularly in Asia. But private equity is a source and private banking is a source. But it is a challenge for everybody in the industry.
And some of the larger miners are now selling off their coal mine assets. Is there a chance you might be on the acquisition hunt for more mines? I know you bought your Queensland mine in 2018 from Wesfarmers for about 700 million Australian dollars, and in hindsight, that looks like it was a pretty good deal.
We're pleased with it, and if we could find another one as good, we'd move on that as well. The best assets are in the hands of the very large operators, and we would be very interested if they were put on the block.
Look, we know there's global inflationary pressure at the moment, rising interest rates. So what impact is that having on Coronado and your cost of production?
More in the US than in Australia. Inflation hasn't quite been as high in Australia, but in the US, the cost of steel, most of the US operations are underground, so we don't use that much fuel oil, but the cost of steel, cost of other inputs, cost of parts has gone up, and the cost of transportation has gone up.
Does coal have a long-term future?
It does. It's projected to grow till 2050, which certainly takes care of most of the lives of our assets, but it's projected to grow largely because the seaborne market grows. Indigenous supplies of coal tend to dry up, and the seaborne market continues to grow.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, there's a big wake-up call for our services sector and especially the hospitality industry as our borders reopen to foreign travellers, but simply there are not enough workers to look after them. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend. Without doubt, one of the industries most affected by the pandemic and its economic consequences was hospitality. Initially, it had to deal with lockdowns, closed borders and limits on the number of patrons allowed in their premises. Many were sent to the wall as a consequence. But after that came chronic staff shortages that led to venues being forced to limit their operations. Like other industries disrupted by staff shortages, technology will play an increasing role in service-based businesses, and that's something occupying the mind of computer technology company Oracle. This week, I caught up with its local managing director, Cherie Ryan.
Well, we've seen this automation happen during the pandemic, a huge rush to automation. Consumers were saying, we need to get to those services. How do we get to them if we can't physically get to them? So we saw many other industries take this up. And what we've seen through this survey is that in the hospitality industry, there is a time to market here that the hospitality industry isn't taking advantage of. And with this survey, we're seeing that the Northern Hemisphere is seeing a huge uplift in people travelling and moving into hotels and taking great holidays, and we're about to see that happen in Australia. So how are we going to address that here in Australia?
Okay, so this might be as simple as you check yourself into a hotel. It might be that you have better information about the place you're going to. But because that hotel might say, for example, have fewer staff, it might mean that you start to automate ordering of food or other services through that organisation.
Well, it's even more than that. So in Australia, we've seen about 30,000 people leave the hospitality industry. But we're now seeing a surge come back in terms of people wanting to take a holiday. In fact, 93% of Australians say in the next 6 months they're going to take a holiday. And 30% have said, we're going to take a revenge holiday, which is, the epic style, my favourite, my bucket list type of holiday. So there's going to be a huge amount of pressure coming onto the hospitality industry.
So there is pressure, but if there's pressure coming on but there's not enough staff, that means you might disappoint your visitor, and that's not what anybody in the hospitality industry wants to do.
Ross, it's even worse. So we've got people who are now wanting to go on these holidays. Their expectations are even higher. They're wanting a digital experience. They're saying, I want a contactless check-in. I want to be able to check in when I want to. I want to check out when I want to. I want to have a home away from home experience. I want to be able to use my gaming console when I'm there. So there's now this additional pressure in terms of the the desires of those people that are wanting to take these holidays on the hoteliers. So how are they going to address that too? So yes, how are they going to use the people that they've got at 70-80% staffing levels? How are they going to now deliver the types of services with these additional pressures that the consumers are now wanting?
And we can see those pressures already with airlines and clearly with the problems they have with baggage handling.
Yes.
You can see it in terms of the queues at airports or other parts of the world.
Yes.
And so Australians have got to be conscious of the fact that the whole service industry is being disrupted right now as a result of staff shortages. It's going to change.
It is. And if you look at just the use of AI and cloud, we saw a great uplift during the pandemic of the use of cloud and AI technology. We saw the change in consumer needs. If we look at the aquarium at Melbourne Zoo, people have said, 50% of Australians have said, look, we don't want to stand in a check-in queue. We don't want to wait for our coffees. We want to be able to pre-order that. So it's those types of technologies that are now addressing the types of needs that travellers are now expecting. So Australia is going to need to step up to that.
Okay, so there's one other aspect of this, and that is the advantage that if you do embrace this, embrace the cloud, embrace self-check-in, self-ordering, that you gain data about your customer that you previously might have been imagining or doing through surveys. That's the advantage of taking this place. So it's not only reducing cost potentially long term, giving a better customer outcome, but then giving you data to understand more about that customer.
Absolutely. So now you can start being predictive in what your expectations may be of the travellers as they start to travel and start to enjoy the facilities of those hotels. So they may want to pay for the services that they want to use rather than pay for it, just all the service. So you'll be able to predict that and use that in your supply chain in terms of what you're going to purchase in and affect your stock levels. You may be able to provide additional services that those travellers may want to need. So now you can use that data that's now available to you. However, one of the things that you will need to do is to train the staff. So how do you use that information? How can you best utilise that information? How can you get the staff away from being tethered from the front desk and being out there amongst the guests?
So this is actually a fundamental change also in the way in which you hire people, because previously you might have hired very outgoing hospitality style people. In the future, you might also be those types of people with very high degrees of tech skills.
It's a very exciting time.
Tell you what, Cherie, Ryan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ross.
So that's it for the program this Sunday. Up next, all the latest news right here on Sky News. Business Weekend returns next Sunday. But don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest business news with our daily program Business Now, 4:30 and 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also catch our program and more via our website, skynews.com.au. Thanks for your company today. I'm Ross Greenwood. We'll see you next week.